Today, we'll be wrapping up our spring 2021 season with a discussion on a variety of pressing topics, facing our nation with our distinguished guest, Dr. Pamela Fiber-Ostrow, Professor of Political Science here at CSUF.
Followed by a look at the pending recall election of California Governor Gavin Newsom.
And finally, we're committed to bringing you the news, views, and info to go on this episode of the Report Roundtable Discussion. I'm Tristan Aguinog.
I'm Bree Eastlick.
I'm Amanda Mendoza.
And I'm Jorge Flores. As you can see, we're continuing to practice social distancing and are going to conduct our episodes via Zoom for the foreseeable future. Although we cannot be in person together, we invite you all to continue to be part of that discussion. Follow us on Twitter at The Report CSUF or on our Titan TV Instagram at Titan TV CSUF to keep in touch with us and view our new content.
In Biden's first joint address to Congress last week, the president used his time at the podium to discuss some of his administration's accomplishments during his first 100 days in office, as well as set the agenda for the future. In one part of the address, the president stood firm on his views of gun violence, which he asserted has indeed become an epidemic in America, and that Senate Republicans need to, quote, join the overall majority of Democratic colleagues and close the loopholes required in background checks purchases of guns. The president proposed a ban on the assault weapons and magazines of high capacity and asked Congress to pass a legislation to reduce gun violence. This comes as the House passed two bills that closed loopholes last month. However, the Biden administration is not waiting for Congress to make a decision and has announced 6 initial actions that he plans to impose. Now, Professor, I kind of want to talk about, it's very controversial. It's very divided when we come and talk about guns. How do you see people reacting, especially those who are for guns, to Biden's 6th executive order plan instead of him possibly waiting for congressional approval of the bill? How do you think people are going to react to this?
I think given the polarized nature of the United States today, we're going to see a continuation of this idea that although Biden promised to unite us, he is dividing us because he's not waiting for a Congress which is supposed to act in a bipartisan way. So I don't think it's going to be very popular with Republicans. On the other hand, the majority of Americans agree that background checks, red flag warnings, and eliminating the kinds of guns that can be assembled without really taking much time. I think the majority of Americans across parties agree that these are really important measures. So I hesitate to think that there will be a lot of backlash, because I think once it's in place, it will actually it will please American voters. But they make really good talking points for Republicans who continue to assault the Biden administration for lack of bipartisanship.
Now, Professor, I want to ask you something. First of all, I'm going to give a little bit of context when it comes about us as students. We've seen a lot of mass shootings, whether it's in schools, in public places. Personally, I think we need a gun reform. However, I do agree with you that with this process, it's like the correct path for us to get into these goals. Biden's administration and his executive orders, they are implying a little bit more of pressure from the federal government into every single state and their rules and the ways that they try to do things. So my follow-up question for you is, you mentioned about Republicans and how they are reacting right now. Many of them, they feel like their Second Amendment rights have been violated. So are they really?
So none of the proposals that are on the table for the Biden administration would actually even encroach on any of the Second Amendment jurisprudence that we've seen handed down by the court. There is a new case that's coming around that the court has agreed to look at in the next term that asks questions about whether laws that restrict the carrying of guns outside your home, whether those are constitutional. But the ones in question don't encroach on anyone's right under the Second Amendment, at least not according to the court, because even there are 2 cases, one that involved a Washington, D.C. ordinance and one in Chicago. The court even then said, despite the right to have a gun in your home, it's not absolute. So none of the things that the Biden administration is proposing would actually infringe on the Second Amendment. I think the problem is the minute we mention guns, everyone assumes that it violates the Second Amendment. But like the First Amendment, there's lots of things we can't just say wherever we want, whenever we want to. And I think the problem is the polarized nature and it's very forgive the expression, but it's very triggering, right? Because people want to make a bigger deal of this. And instead of having complex policy conversations, we're sort of devolving into sound bites and memes. And I just don't think that's the most appropriate way to handle, as you said, Jorge, these very, very important considerations. I have kids in school. I have kids who are going to be practicing mass shooter drills. That's not how I envision my children going to school. So I think given the lack of conversation that we're able to have, I'm afraid that we do have a battle ahead of us to try and make regulations. But no, legally, they don't encroach on the Second Amendment.
Alrighty. Now, I kind of want to talk about ghost guns. Now, these are gun kits and they can be built within 30 minutes. They can't be traced to anyone, like I said, because due to lack of serial numbers. Now, I kind of want to get your opinion on this. Do you think it's possible that we could possibly completely get rid of ghost guns, or do you think it's going to be a lot harder?
So caveat, I'm in no way an expert on guns. So it's not anything that I know personally very much about. The conversation really devolves back to is, can we really eliminate a market that exists underground, right? We ask the same thing about drugs. We ask the same thing about firearms, which is we're trying to do above ground, which is happening below the official market. And so sure, we can certainly make them illegal to mass produce. We can certainly have laws about that, but I don't know that would be as effective as other kinds of laws. But I do think that it's an important symbolic gesture to suggest that we're not going to wait around for another one of these mass shootings or another school shooting, or even just interpersonal violence that it's occurring. I mean, we have this focus on mass shootings, but the United States suffers from gun violence in communities every day, and the numbers are staggering. I think one of the problems is that the gun supporters believe that the only way to stop gun violence is to have somebody else with a gun. And so fundamentally, there's a disagreement on how to solve the problem. And so when people see, there's been tragedies just weekly about gun violence, people walking into supermarkets or in a variety of settings. And so I'm not sure that focusing on violence, we're starting to lose our sensitivity towards it. And so I think the Biden administration would do well to also be involved in the conversation about bodily autonomy, individual rights, but talking about individual rights of everyone, not just gun owners, but also the types of people who have a right to be free from violence themselves, instead of focusing on the mass violence, about the freedoms of people to live peacefully, and to see if we can come to some common ground, because right now there's no common ground, right? There's nothing in between those two camps.
Absolutely. Now, Tristan, how about you take us into more about Biden's address and what he said?
Most definitely, Bree. Moving on to our next topic. Also during his address, the president urged Congress to pass the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act by May 25th, a year after Floyd's murder in Minneapolis, Minnesota. The act would aim to hold more law enforcement officers accountable for their actions and ban certain maneuvers that have been the cause of death for many Black American police brutality victims. Let's take a look at Biden's remarks on the act.
We've all seen the knee of injustice on the neck of Black Americans. Now's our opportunity to make some real progress. We have to come together to rebuild trust between law enforcement and the people they serve, to root out systemic racism in our criminal justice system. We need to work together to find a consensus. But let's get it done next month, by the first anniversary of George Floyd's death. The country supports this reform, and Congress should act.
So when taking a look at this act that Biden is urging Congress to take action for, the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act, there's a lot of provisions that are very compelling that a lot of people are in favor of. The banning of chokeholds and federal no-knock warrants. The act also aims to prohibit racial and religious profiling. And it's also going to train officers how to handle these profiling situations or tendencies. It also will ensure the usage of body cameras, which will be funded by federal funds. It's also most importantly, going to bolster accountability. And as we've known, the Democratic-controlled House has passed the act, but Senate hasn't responded yet. They have until the 25th once again. And the goal of this act is to restore trust with the police, which in America in a time right now is fractured. So, Doctor, I wanted to ask you, when you take a look at these different tragedies that we've seen all year, with Breonna Taylor, Daunte Wright, Andrew Brown, just to name a few, perhaps people might argue that these are racially motivated shootings. I mean, historically in the United States, policing has always been factored around race. I mean, the first ever police force was the slave patrols. It's always been a systemic racial issue. So that being said, Doctor, I wanted to know, how likely do you think, or do you see this act being passed by Congress? Are these reforms compelling enough for Congress to take action upon? What are your thoughts on that?
That's a heavy question, and there's a lot to unpack. And so to think about some of the things that you mentioned, there's a lot in there, right? Some of the things that you've already mentioned. Body cameras, I think, universally, most police forces are in agreement that that's become important, largely because it offers both sides some accountability. And so despite there are a lot of citizen journalists now who have cell phones and are able to take those videos, as we know, right, the reason that George Floyd, there was any accountability is because of a citizen journalist. So body cameras, I don't think are controversial, and I don't think that's going to be what gums up the works. As far as the particulars of specific, I know you talked about chokeholds and things like that. I don't think those are the particularly controversial. I think eventually police forces that's not going to be the thing that they stand on ceremony for. I think we're more interested in seeing things like the qualified immunities and the police unions and the ability of police officers to have some shield from their own actions and the very strength of those unions in backing their officers. So I'm more concerned, to be honest with you, about the future of those types of policies than I am about whether, the House and the Senate can agree on each one of these smaller pieces. And those are going to have to come at the state level, not at the federal level. But as far as the federal government goes, again, because we painted this as a them and us scenario, if it does pass, we all understand we need Manchin from West Virginia, Joe Manchin, that's now become the most important member of the United States Senate, simply because he is a Democrat, but he is a very conservative Democrat. And so to get his support, there may have to be chunks of those provisions that are taken out. So I think some of it is likely to pass, particularly in the name of George Floyd. We also know that Senator Scott is involved in that, and he also wants to see there's some measures that are taken on behalf of victims of police violence. So I think there is a greater likelihood of success there because we do have a partner in both parties. But as far as the ones that I think that are going to be the most meaningful, those have to come at the state level. And I think having the federal government impose those would actually make it much more difficult to see those pass.
Personally, because of current tensions between police officers and their communities, I don't know what the public perception of the law enforcement will be even a year from now. However, we do know that there are different events so communities and police officers can connect, such as having donuts together, coffee, etc. And some are even calling for the use of counselors to de-escalate tension instead. And others even want the police to be defunded. So I would like to ask you, Doctor, what else should be required of police officers to gain the trust in the community besides this act?
Yeah, those are important questions. Again, as I said, under the gun things, this is not my specific area of expertise, but sort of looking at the way that communities have been more successful in integrating these policies is when they build relationships and trusts with the community. And one of the ways of doing that is inviting them not just to have a seat at the table, but to also have lunch. So in other words, we use this expression all the time, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu, but I don't think that simply sitting at the table is sufficient. I think it's also having absolute input into the policies, which I realize is a very fraught conversation because policing is its own science and we have these conversations about it. But if the communities that are most impacted by policing don't have a say in the future of how their communities are going to be policed, I don't see a lot of success in the future. I don't see that we're building bridges. I don't think that we're building trust. And so that can't happen without the community leaders being invited to have conversations with the police chief, with the police unions, with the police officers. Some communities are working towards that. So certainly, the expression defunding the police is very controversial because to many, it sounds like we're abolishing police altogether. What instead we're suggesting is let's take some of the funding that we give to police and find ways to fund social workers and find ways to fund more emergency personnel and people with expertise who can help the situation de-escalate rather than leading to violence. So I think one of the things we have to do, and I think it's got to be involved, it's got to have the people who are most impacted have to have a seat at the table. They can no longer simply be the victims. They also have to be part of the building of coalitions.
Going off of that, another topic that the Biden administration has been stressing upon lately and most recently is immigration. Jorge, we want to know more about that, please.
Of course. So moving on to our next topic, President Biden's administration announced last Monday that the U.S. is beginning to reunite families that were separated at the U.S.-Mexico border under former President Trump's term. This announcement comes shortly after the Supreme Court's decision in the Niz-Chavez versus Garland case. The issue before the court was if the government must require all information regarding an immigrant's hearing notice in a single document or multiple span of documents. The court ruled 6-3 that all required information, such as the time and place of a non-citizen removal proceedings, must be included in order for the notice to trigger the stop time rule that ends their period of physical presence in the United States. This is seen as an unexpected win for immigrants potentially facing deportation as the Biden administration currently seeks to enact immigration reform. This is a whole environment right now. And in my opinion, I see that the Biden administration is trying to do a lot of changes against what the Trump administration did in the past. So we have different things here. Since changing the wording when it comes about the immigration and how we are looking to people who are now undocumented instead of mentioning or telling them illegal, we're changing the wording when it comes in the rules that we have, in the documents that we have. We see that here locally, we have the Long Beach Convention Center as this kind of center supporting the unaccompanied immigrants and children. So we can see some actions of the Biden administration trying to help the immigration crisis that we have. However, at the same time, the Biden administration tries not to call it a crisis, but just a situation. So we have both pros and cons. The question that I have for you, Professor, is that this is very interesting because this is a mix of justices who were in majority and minority. So in your opinion, is this surprising, or could this potentially indicate the future of the court's ruling?
So now we're in an area that I feel really comfortable in because we're talking about the Supreme Court, and I'm an absolute Supreme Court nerd. So forgive me for taking a few extra moments here. That decision has so much in there. It is reminiscent of the most ridiculous conversations we have in terms of law, which is what is the definition of A? Literally, that decision hinged on whether you had to have all the information for someone in order to be eligible for deportation in multiple documents or in a document. And Justice Gorsuch parsed the language in order to find that no, if you send multiple letters, that's not the same as a single one. And the way congressional legislation was written, it was a document. Just to kind of clarify what was going on in that case. I don't know how I see the court with regards to immigration. We know that the court, for example, told the Trump administration, you can't simply stop DACA and take a bunch of people who were brought here as children and about face. That's not something that you can do. So the court, but remember that was before the death of Ruth Bader Ginsburg and the addition of Amy Coney Barrett. So we've got some changes going on, but that's just one justice. This case had 6. What I'm worried about was that they were more interested in the textual conversation of the statute, in other words, the A document versus multiple documents, than the concern about the human rights at the backside of those documents. And so I keep a magic 8-ball on my desk so I can ask it questions just like this. Well, look, what, can we expect the court to see, can we expect to see more information from the court? And the thing with the immigration questions, the court has given great latitude to the presidents to act on areas of immigration. We even saw that in the Trump administration with the Muslim ban, right? So we know that the court has given great latitude towards the presidency. Congress needs to act. This is essentially what the court has told us by that case definition. It said, look, we are going to go with the language of Congress. If Congress writes it, we will be okay with it. So My guess is that if Congress can get it together to write a law, the court will be deferential. And that's more to do with the authority of the federal government, the president and the Congress, than it is to do with the human rights violations on the other end of things. Because there is the ideological split among the justices, so it's not clear where they fall with regards to whether the people that are standing at the border right now or who have crossed that border, whether they're indeed as interested in their rights as they are as in the rights of Congress and the president. That's my take on this particular decision. It was a really good way to shield themselves from getting into the mire of the questions about immigration.
Absolutely. Those were some amazing points right there that you said. Now, we've actually been talking about immigration reform for many weeks on our show. The ACLU and countless of others, they've worked to fight for better reform. And right now, over 1,000 migrant children are still separated from their parents. Over 400 adults' locations are still unknown. And I'm very concerned because who knows if we'll either ever find them or when we will and be able to reunite them with their children. You know, we actually discussed this yesterday in OC News as well. Since yesterday, 8 families have been reunited, and they hope to reunite 100 families by the end of the week, with over 5,500 children still being separated from their parents, or had been separated under Trump's zero tolerance policy. You know, this is something that, turning to Biden, you know, he talked a lot about this during his run for office. Now, what else do you think, what kind of reform do you think that should be added? You know, what can we do correctly for these families, but also for the country?
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there. So you're asking, you know, what can we do for the immigrants themselves? Many of these people are seeking asylum. They're seeking to be refugees, right? We've got a number of different legal classifications, and it depends on, are they standing outside the borders or are they inside the borders? So there's 2 different questions there about their status. And so the Biden administration has a mess of immigration law. It hasn't been fixed in decades. I mean, literally decades. We have to remember it was actually during the Reagan administration when we had a huge grant of asylum, and that seems to have missed somehow. We skipped generations of Republicans who've forgotten that. This is not unprecedented bipartisanship agreement on how we can, in fact, open the borders to people who have either been here, working, contributing, have helped our communities thrive and grow. That's not unprecedented. And we have a blueprint for that. That's actually something that we can do. But with regards to, I think we were talking about earlier, this, you know, the Biden administration is trying not to call it a crisis, but when we look at the kinds of situations that people are trying to escape from in Central America, there are absolutely bottlenecks in the immigration law that keep us from allowing people to seek literally to just survive as they move from one place to another. That, I think, has to be our priority. We already have a blueprint for people who are here, who are contributing. We've done it. There's no reason we can't do that again. In fact, there's popular support for that among Republicans as well, Republicans in border states and border towns. So I actually think that's the easier of the 2 to fix. The one that's more difficult is this notion that we, quote, open the floodgates. And I find that really problematic language, because we never asked those questions before we started typifying immigrants as being only from Mexico or only from Central America. And I think that conversation has to change. I think we have to recognize that there is a humanity at the other side of this conversation who are seeking what we all want, which is safety, freedom, peace, just to be able to feed your family. And I think that we have to shape that conversation slightly differently in order for us to reconcile some of these policies. There are lots of things that are wrong in the immigration policies. They're bottlenecks. The ICE has a huge backlog. That is a problem in itself that I don't even know how the administration starts to unravel, to be honest with you. I don't know how they start to do that. But 5,000 families separated is horrifying, and that we're sort of celebrating 8. I was explaining this to my kids yesterday, that I said, there's these wonderful images, and I said, but don't lose focus. 8 out of 5,000 is a horrifying figure, and I could only imagine the pain that those parents are feeling, and as we can't even find them. So there's a lot of work to be done. Focusing on the human element here is really, really important. That there are people that every single day are not reunited with their families. Is a single day too many.
Absolutely. Those are great points, and you're absolutely right. Now, we kind of want to take a turn now, become more local, and we want to go into more local government here in the state of California. Now, Amanda, why don't you talk about Gavin Newsom?
After over a year of intense scrutiny by the GOP, California Republicans have officially gathered over 1.6 million signatures to force a recall election of Governor Gavin Newsom. The governor is now tasked with seeing the state safely returns to a sense of normalcy, while also running a campaign to defend his job, a task which reportedly has the support of President Biden and VP Harris. While a second verification process for the recall is pending, Republicans who intend to challenge Newsom include John Cox, a businessman, Kevin Falconer, the former mayor of San Diego, and Caitlyn Jenner, a reality TV star and Olympian. The recall election may take place as early as this summer. So Gavin Newsom has been a pretty controversial politician throughout California due to his actions during the pandemic. Some say his restrictions caused businesses to suffer, while supporters say that his restrictions have helped curb COVID in the state, and that because of his help, distribution of vaccines to California have been quick and efficient. It's also important to note that his approval ratings are still above 50%, according to CNN. So do you think this recall election should be taken seriously, or are the odds in Newsom's favor?
I think both. I think you're raising some really important questions. I think right now the odds are in his favor, but I don't think that he has time to relax. This is getting national attention, right? So we already have, of course, we have Vice President Harris, who is a Californian, who is a Northern Californian. So we have national support and national attention, and you're going to see a lot of national contributions being made for and against Gavin Newsom. And I see this, unfortunately, it's not just a referendum on Gavin Newsom, but it's a referendum on the liberalism in California. And it's a chance for Trump supporters across the country to dig into that stronghold of liberalism in the state of California. So I do think Gavin Newsom needs to take it seriously, in that even if he can come out, and I think he can survive this, but he won't come out unscathed. And I think that's a really important reminder here, is when we look at the kinds of people that are entering the race, we have some credible candidates who have some history in the state of California in running for politics. And I'm afraid it's going to be the clown car that it was in 2003. And I don't think any of you would have remembered that, but I can vividly remember there were like 100, there were more people than I have in my phone book, right? That I wouldn't be able to count the number of people who ran for governor. So I do think it is a referendum on a couple of mistakes that Gavin Newsom made during the pandemic. His French laundry meal is going to come up more than it should. It was a mistake. He owned it. I get it. I'm sure if the Democrats had a Republican governor, they would have used it. But I don't hear about, Senator Ted Cruz going to Mexico, except I just brought it up, right? But that's not going to cut into his ability to get reelected. So I think they need to find more that went wrong in the pandemic.
And as Newsom, he said in a tweet, he's calling it a Republican recall. He stated, quote, "This Republican recall threatens our values and seeks to undo the important progress we've made," end quote. And he's referring to this progress on COVID, helping struggling families during these tough times, and also passing gun violence solutions. When you take a look at this recall, the catalyst of it is mainly because of Newsom's pandemic response, closing down businesses for a long time. And of course, many Republicans despise the tier system. But when you take a look at the progress that we're making so far, California is one of the lowest states in terms of COVID rates because of Newsom's ambitious efforts to contain the virus. Should Newsom meet the target date of June 15th to lift all the COVID-19 restrictions? And do you think that would change the GOP's mindset on the issue?
I'm hoping the June 15th date, I'm hoping we can hold it there, right? There are too many moving parts for any of us to be able to say that's a definite. And even he said, it's a date, but if things go the other way, he will have to about face. I don't think anything's going to change the Republicans, to be honest with you. I don't think anything is going to reasonably convince them, hey, we've turned this thing around. The date is going to be set for my assumption is that there won't be too many people who withdraw their signatures. They were able to collect a lot of signatures. There are a lot of angry people. And I think they're in a minority, to be honest with you, but they are out there. But I think we can convince independents, moderates, and Democrats that these were reasonable measures taken to support the state of California. There were a lot of schools that closed that have started to reopen. A lot of schools did open, right? Under the guidelines, they were able to open in hybrid and they were able to support students' needs. We saw a lot of innovation in the schools. We saw a lot of businesses who were able to pivot. I mean, there was a lot that happened under Gavin Newsom's watch that actually we're not talking about. And I think that has to be brought out as well. As bad as it was, it could have been considerably worse. And I do think that the reminder that if we can get out of this, I think that June 15th date is really important, not to convince Republicans to change their minds, but to convince either reluctant voters or voters who are unlikely to want to participate to get off their couches and go vote. I don't think many people are as interested in this as the Republicans are. I don't think the Democrats, sort of Democratic voters, I don't know that they're taking this as seriously as they should. Hopefully that galvanizes them to just get up and vote. And I think that would make the difference.
You said that's more likely the Republicans are the ones taking this election seriously. So because of this, do you think this is a valid exercise of constitutional rights or a political or partisan ploy of sorts?
I think it's both. I mean, it's within the state constitution to recall a governor. We don't have, as you would, so in an impeachment proceeding where you have to bring valid reasons to recall a governor. We saw that with Gray Davis. We've been what's weird is that we didn't do this that long ago. I know it's long ago for you, but it's not long ago for those of us who've been around for a while. And so not liking someone's public policy approaches doesn't seem to rise to the level of an impeachment proceeding, but you don't need that in the state of California. You can recall if you get the signatures and you do jump through the hurdles. But is it partisan driven? Oh, absolutely, 100%. And the folks that collected the signatures admitted it, right? This was a referendum on his policies that they don't like. And we're continuing to see that. We see that in pockets of Orange County. So I think, to answer your question, Amanda, I think it's both. It is constitutional because our California state constitution allows us to do this.
Well, it's great to be talking about all of these different issues that are polarizing our nation today. And with that being said, Doctor, thank you so much for taking the time to hang out with us here in the report. It's been a pleasure having you, and we hope to see you soon next time. Thank you so much, Dr. Fiber-Ostrow.
Thanks for having me.
Happy Asian, Pacific Islander, and Desi Heritage Month tie-ins. This week, we'll be highlighting Chicago restaurant owner Jackson Chu's selfless actions. After recently opening his sushi restaurant 312 Fish Market, Chu noticed his grandparents were stuck at home eating the same food day after day and figured that must be the case for all other seniors also. Soon after, Chu began delivering food from his restaurant weekly to 2 senior buildings in his neighborhood. The seniors are receiving delicious restaurant quality food, specifically curated to consider their dietary needs, and are also allowing them to stay safely at home during the pandemic. Chu's actions have even gone on to influence other food services like Chicago's largest Chinese supermarket and Chu Kwan Bakery to join Chu in providing different foods to seniors. Now, it's great to see that Chu is doing this for his community, and I wanted to share with you guys why he's doing this in the first place. He said, quote, "Times change, but you need to appreciate where you came from. The seniors are our backbone," end quote. And it's just important to acknowledge his roots in history. Certainly, he's a class act and an excellent example of the many Asian Americans that contribute to an ever-changing society today in America. So I give my round of applause to him. And with that, that's all the time we have today on the report roundtable discussion. And before we end it here today, I just want to give my brief little thank you to all of our viewers and our supporters for here at the report roundtable discussion. Although my time here has been short-lived for this semester, I want to give a special shout out to our executive producer, Kelly, for blessing me with this opportunity to be here on the report, for Jeffrey, Richard for making us look good on camera, and for all the producers that help make the report what it is today. I just want to say thank you so much for this opportunity, and I look forward to the many future episodes the report has to offer. That being said, have a safe summer, everyone, and stay tuned for more news, views, and info to go in the future. I'm Tristan Aguinog.
I'm Amanda Mendoza.
I'm Jorge Flores.
And before I sign off for the last time, I want to say thank you to all of those who have supported us and have allowed the 4 of us to keep you updated on the news and talk about our opinions. Now, you are the reason we do it. And as I'll be graduating this month and ending my 4th season with the report, I also want to say thank you to everyone at Titan TV, my co-anchors. You guys are so awesome. You push me, you make me better, and you always cheer me on. And I can't thank you enough. You guys have become my family and an outlet for me. And it's been an honor working with all of you these last 2 years. Also, thank you, Kelly. Thank you, Richard, who is our editor. You guys are awesome. You are graduating as well, and you guys will so be missed. You know, you guys keep our show running, and I don't know where we'd be without you guys. So now signing off for the last time for the report, I'm Bree Eastlick, and as always, stay fresh, Fullerton.